Welcome, Temple, and thanks for being here. And first, to quote from what you said in your article entitled Structural Inequalities in the Treatment of Standardized Patients and What That Means for Patient Care. In your abstract, you say that standardized patients are proxies for real patients, that they inhabit a territory often unrecognized as professionals in medical education, and that the manner in which SPs are seen and treated by faculty and students may be a reflection of how real patients are seen and treated. Not always heard, not always respected. So I think that really nicely sums up this article. But first, if you could just tell me what prompted you to do this research. What stories did you hear from the SPs, the standardized patients, that led up to this?
Sure. First of all, thank you so much for doing this and for inviting me to share this work, because I really was sort of flabbergasted by it, honestly, and I think it deserves a pretty wide audience. I started engaging in it because over the years, of course, I'd heard, a couple stories from SPs here and there who had been disrespected in various ways. And then several years ago, our institution, they started a campus-wide initiative on cultural humility. And not unlike, many institutions, it was a big thing. And then one day, after hearing yet another story from an SP, sort of one of those lounge conversations, I really began to think of these stories in conjunction with larger structural inequities and a lack of cultural humility. So I think my initial impetus in convening the focus groups was to just be able to see, as a whole, all of these stories come together. And initially, I was just going to share it with the administration so that they might have an idea of how far down the hierarchy, which we talk about, that the structural inequities reach. But then as soon as I convened the focus groups, I realized, oh my gosh, I really have something larger here. It needs to be related to the culture of SP methodology and overall patient care.
What kind of stories were you hearing from the SPs? What did they tell you?
They would share stories like some of which are included in the article, but stories of being with a learner who would go, oh, this simulation stuff, in the real world, I wouldn't do this or say this. Stories of particularly the SPs who at our institution have extensive training if they want to and become physical teaching associates. So they teach the physical exam on their own bodies, but experiences where, in a small group, a faculty might be in there and the faculty might want to demonstrate something and say, no, for the liver palpation, you really have, now, this is gonna hurt. And the SPs are going, where do they get off saying they can hurt me? What is that about? So those are some of the first stories, and then I just was like, okay, we just need to hear more of these. I need to know what else has been going on that I haven't heard.
What do you think accounts for the faculty treating the standardized patients more like objects? And you also make the case, which I think is pretty strong, that also is carried over into actual patient care. But any thoughts on what brings up this situation or why this happens? Why do even faculty members who you would think would know better, who are involved in medical education, still treat standardized patients sometimes like they're teaching objects and not real people? What are any thoughts on that?
I wish I had an answer for that. I really do. We could probably change medical education if we had answers to those kind of philosophical questions. But I really don't know. I just know that they do see SPs as tools and objects. Sometimes even in things like scheduling, we have to remind faculty our SPs are going to need a break. You know, they can't work 6 hours straight with no break. They need a break. Oh yes. Well, that'll extend our day, won't it? Yes, it might.
Yeah.
And they still need they are human beings with human bodies. I wish I knew where it comes from. I don't know whether it's, one of those things that's sort of passed down from their own days of medical education, or whether it's a structural. I really don't know. I would really, if any of your listeners have any insight into this, I would really love to hear that.
Yeah, hopefully this will really provoke a conversation among people that do this. But we hear this quite a lot, that when it comes to SPs and programs, and you mentioned something really that happens quite a bit, the idea of scheduling, that sometimes faculty don't see a problem in just treating this like a factory approach, where you're going from one student to another to another to another. Then the next group comes in, and it can go like that all day long. And it just makes me wonder about the business model of medical education and how that parallels the business model of medicine itself, where sometimes doctors have to go from one patient to the next without a break. And
Right.
so the abuse, quote, of patients kind of parallels the abuse of the medical establishment, of medical doctors themselves. It's not a very healthy environment sometimes.
Right.
And then
Exactly
it
right.
translates into how they treat patients. So
I feel like, I don't know. I don't know if all doctors like that business model constraint that they have. They have to see so many patients in a day or in an hour, and so they cut short their encounter times with patients. I don't know if they like it. I feel like, you hear certainly a lot of professional burnout because providers can't engage and build relationship with their patients anymore, or it's more difficult to. Um, but yeah, I mean, we do. As you said, it's a business model. We talk about the military industrial complex, and I've heard medicine called, the medical industrial complex too. What have we become? Um, yeah.
yeah,
Can we fix it?
yeah. And can we change this? And it's not to say that all doctors buy into this
Right.
or believe it or even practice this. I don't want to.
Yes.
And I know there are individual faculty members that are exceedingly respectful of the process, especially when they're involved in the process of working in, let's say, a standardized patient program. They might really understand from the inside how difficult this work really is for the individuals who play patients all day long.
Right.
Yeah.
Yes, we have definitely found that the faculty who I think best understand what SPs do, um, are the ones who have been involved in the process. They're not just, using the program, but they were involved in developing cases with the stakeholders, with SPs, with maybe community stakeholders, and then they get a much better sense of what the SPs do. And we have several faculty members here who are saying, it's the SPs who should be called SPEs, SP educators, and you educators need another term for yourselves, but it's the SPs who should be called the educators, and they are.
I absolutely agree with that statement, that the ones that really are working with the learners are the standardized patients, and the educators, the trainers,
Mm-hmm.
are coaching them and preparing them to do this work. But it's the standardized patients who are in the room
Yeah,
with the students who are portraying illness, assessing the skills, providing feedback, are the ones that indeed, are the ones that are actually doing the education. You
right.
mentioned something too, that you wanted to share your findings with faculty in the article. I'm really curious what kind of reception this has gotten in your institution, or if you've heard from others about what they think about the research that you've done.
Um, when it first came out, or actually, I presented the findings to the faculty here before the article was actually published, and it was, I think, in general, received with some surprise, and also on many levels, some appreciation.
Mhm.
I think a lot of faculty, initially responded with, "Oh my gosh, we had no idea that was happening. Um, and thank you for bringing it to our attention." Now, has it over the years, changed, I don't know, faculty engagement with SPs? I'm not sure. One of the things I'd really like to do is sort of a follow-up study to see if things have changed, or if there's any difference that SPs perceive now.
When we were going back and forth um, before this interview, I think I asked the question, and I don't know if you have an answer to this, is are SP programs themselves complicit in this model? And if so, how does that happen? Do you have any thoughts about that?
I think it's a it's a really important question. Um, we do know, of course, that medicine is hierarchical, um, and frankly, probably still misogynistic in many areas. Um, so the SP programs really, I think maybe they do sort of perpetuate that, at least that hierarchy. Um, I see in our institution where, we as trainers slash educators, our value as educators isn't necessarily seen as equal to the experience and expertise that the clinical faculty bring, for instance. We're different, but I would like to propose that we have equal benefits to bring to SP methodology. And I don't think that is acknowledged across the board. And I don't know if ASPE can, work to change that or not, but or maybe we just need to change it internally within our institutions. But I do see that, and clinical faculty have wonderful expertise in their areas, but they are not necessarily educators,
Right.
and yet they are the ones who make the quote educational calls. And sometimes, we as educators will sit back and go, no, this isn't educationally sound.
It's really peculiar in this field of medicine that there's a grand assumption that if you have a medical degree or a nursing degree, I think this goes beyond even, oh, maybe actually it's a different question. Maybe it's different in nursing culture. I'm not sure. They may have a better understanding. of the
Yeah.
structural inequalities and adjust for that. So that's something else, perhaps to study. Is the same issue going on there? But there anyway. There's this assumption that if you have an advanced medical degree, you're a teacher. You know how to educate,
Yeah.
and so the problems that students are exposed to then get perpetuated when they become residents and they start to teach students. So it's complicated.
It is complicated.
Yeah, and you mentioned something else. You mentioned misogynistic, and I was wondering, are you referring to the fact that most SP educators are female in this field? It's a female dominated field for the most part.
It is. Um, and I think that's changing, at least just sort of as I see the membership of ASPE sort of
Hmm.
evolving a little bit there. I don't really know why that was or is. Clearly, as we know, Howard Barrows, um, one of the founders of the methodology or a piece of the methodology. I don't think he felt that way,
Right.
but but it I don't know how that came to be about, honestly. I don't know. Have you had thoughts about that or any insights or
I'm not sure, but I think that women, and this is a grand assumption or a big generalization, but I'm going to make it anyway. I think women are naturally more empathic. They're better communicators in general, and they often occupy e- educational positions to a higher degree, I think, than men do, in particular in the lower grades. So
mm-hmm,
I think women may gradually or may kind of organically gravitate towards this field because it requires, the care and nurturing of individuals who are not
mm-hmm.
patients to become patients and to do it on call. So I don't really have an answer to that, why more women get have occupied this field. And I don't have any statistics, but looking at the ASPE membership and my involvement over the years tells me that it's mostly occupied by women in this field of SP educators.
Agreed.
Yeah. And they work
Agreed.
hard. I think it's the other issue. One of the things I said when we were writing back and forth was I thought that women, in some ways, were uh, perhaps victims of their own success at making things happen, doing more with less. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and I hear that across the board in other professions as well, that we need to do more with less. Again, maybe it reflects back to a business model, um, the budgetary issues. These are things that need to be explored. Uh, what are the features in the culture that need to be changed? And I think you kind of suggest that perhaps the best approach is changing it school by school, institution by institution. That we can't wave a magic wand and expect everything to change overnight.
Right. But you bring up a really good point about maybe one piece of the puzzle is budgetary constraints, and ouch. We do know that women are still paid. I don't know what the statistics are today, but so many cents on the dollar compared to men. Um, how we change that system, I don't know. Except that, who's responsible for pointing out those kinds of inequities? I think both men and women need to be the ones who recognize that it's happening and have enough agency to try to articulate those inequities, are the ones who are responsible, right? We have to just keep self-reflecting, self-assessing, men and women, I'm saying, and speaking out when and where we can.
Yeah, it's a really interesting parallel between the structural inequities of women in the workforce, which is gradually changing, and also the structural inequities of how standardized patients are treated, how real
Mhm.
patients are treated. So this is again is a systemic issue with all of these factors kind of intertwined. So it's a complicated solution, but I really appreciate your calling to our attention some of the issues that are evident in your institution, perhaps, and also elsewhere.
Mhm.
I don't think you're alone in this.
No, I don't think I am.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, it is. It's like a thread to follow, right? And there are just so many pieces that are entangled in this ball.
Do you have any intentions then of following up with this study with more interviews or more
I
qualitative
I
research?
do. Right now, I'm involved in in two different kinds of areas, but maybe they're related, and I'll bring them back to again maybe convening some more focus groups with SPs to see how things have changed.
You mentioned that you're writing a book chapter. What are you
So
writing?
I was invited to submit an abstract for a edited compilation, and I think it's called Medical Dialogue. And so I started really thinking about this whole idea of empathy. And so, kind of based on some of your questions, can empathy be taught? Are we talking empathy as an attitude, or are we talking empathetic skills? As we know, empathetic skills are taught in most medical communication curriculum. But we see evidence more and more that students see verbalizing empathy as a skill, and they are skillifying or gamifying it. Like, I'll tick off this item on the checklist, and then when they get out into, their postgraduate internships and residencies, it goes by the wayside. What is that about? And I started thinking, I think most students who come to medicine have a genuine desire to help people. That's my premise anyway. Um, and they come with a great deal, a sense of empathy, wanting to help people. Right? What happens to that? Are we skillifying it to the nth degree so that then they totally lose track of it? And my premise in my book chapter is that I think if we can focus more on that initial open-ended questions eliciting the patient's narrative, that's a way into an empathetic relationship. If you hear somebody's story and why they are so concerned or afraid of this new symptom they've developed, as opposed to just treating it as a symptom, if you really hear that background story of how it affects this individual person, the empathy line can really be explored. And it doesn't take much time to do that, right? So that's kind of my premise in that chapter, that we're skillifying and gamifying this idea of verbal empathy. We have these little acronyms that we teach.
Yeah, I love that term skillifying, that we've operationally defined empathy, a skill that supposedly can then be assessed, and so it's something that students would want to do to get credit for having empathy. But
Yeah.
you mentioned the other idea too, is that it's taught, but is it really learned? As you said, it can go by the wayside. Is it something just to be ticked off versus the kind of empathy that you're talking about, which is an open-ended question that really is based in genuine curiosity?
Yeah.
really wanting to know. Um, but you said it doesn't take much time. Unfortunately, I think it does take time because if you ask a patient, if you're genuinely curious with a patient and you're genuinely interested in them and want to know, they're going to tell you, and that eats up time. And so that to me gets back into the business model of of the patient work itself. It takes time to hear patients, and who has time for that? You know, you want to then stick to the biomedical discourse.
Right, right. Um, I think I both agree and disagree with you. I think it can take up some time, and yet I feel like the information you get could be so valuable that it could lessen the need for additional follow-up questions. You get information that you can then act on and maybe, check in with a patient. Do I have this right? As opposed to having to ask a whole bunch of questions.
Right.
So I don't
Yeah.
know if there's balance there or not.
No, I think in principle, I agree with you that it would point the way and perhaps even save time by asking the patient to identify what's important to you. Um, when I've talked to residents about this, I always have asked them, what's the downside of empathy? And they say, well, it's going to take a lot of time. I'm not sure if I have enough time. So in other work, I've heard, well, I'm the doctor. I deal with the medical problem. It's up to the family to provide empathy. So it gets subcontracted out to the family or a pastoral counselor or someone
Right,
else, a social
right.
worker. So it doesn't always happen within the medical encounter, which can be very short.
Yes,
So
it
it,
does.
it further complicates this problem, again, of time allotment. How much time do we really have? It's a structural issue.
Yeah, it is. Again, gets back to that systemic structural.
Well, when you publish your chapter, I really want to hear about this and
Okay.
talk to you about this some more because this is such an important area. Because I think that how are medical students, young medical students with little clinical experience, expected to learn? You know, are your patients your teachers?
I think
So,
in many cases the patients are the teachers. Yeah.
and so are the
So
standardized patients. Yeah,
yeah. So long story, I'm really excited about that talk and seeing what other people are saying about that for sure.
great. Well, again, thank you so much for being here. It was really just a great conversation with you, Temple, and
It
look
was
forward to
fun.
hearing more. And we'll follow up on this.